stop the thing. Thank you, Kate, Julian's daughter, for that amazing song, Oh My Sweet Carolina. She knocked it out of the park. I'm Debbie Reagan, and I'm Julian's sister-in-law. And on behalf of the Thweatt Brantleys, Ann, David, and Kate, I would like to welcome everybody and to thank all of you for coming to honor Julian. I'd like to read a short quotation from Emerson that, for me, kind of captures Julian's spirit. Few people know how to take a walk. The qualifications are endurance, plain clothes, old shoes, an eye for nature, good humor, vast curiosity, good speech, good silence, and nothing too much. Julian certainly enjoyed walking through life. We hope that the following service will provide you with a picture of this wonderful man. We ask that you bear with us regarding the number of participants today. So many people love Julian and wanted to be part of the service. Everyone has promised to be brief. Hopefully that will be the case. Now I'd like to introduce Julian's sister, Catherine Khalili, who will speak.
I'm Julian's youngest sister. He was 11 years older than I was. And I wanted to read a writing by Michael Josephson. Live a life that matters. Ready or not, someday it will all come to an end, and there will be no more sunrises, no minutes, hours, or days. All the things you collected, whether treasured or forgotten, will pass to someone else. Your wealth, fame, and temporal power will shrivel to irrelevance. It will not matter what you owned or what you were owed. Your grudges, resentments, frustrations, and jealousies will all finally disappear. So too, your hopes, ambitions, plans, and to-do lists will expire. The wins and losses that once seemed so important will fade away. It won't matter where you came from. It won't matter whether you were beautiful or brilliant. Even your gender and skin color will be irrelevant. So what will matter? What will matter is not what you bought, but what you built. Not what you got, but what you gave. What will matter is not your success, but your significance. What will matter is not what you learned, but what you taught. What will matter is every act of integrity, compassion, courage, or sacrifice that enriched, empowered, or encouraged others to emulate your example. What will matter is not your competence, but your character. What will matter is not how many people you knew, but how many will feel a lasting loss when you are gone. What will matter is not your memories, but the memories that live on and those who loved you. What will matter is how long you will be remembered and for what. Living a life that matters doesn't happen by accident. It happens by choice. Julian lived a life that mattered. He was unfailingly kind, compassionate, empathetic, and funny. From the time I was a small child, I remember him as an avid animal lover, a good student, and attentive brother. I cannot remember a time he was ever angry with me. I looked up to him from childhood until now. Whenever I had a problem, Jay, who we called him Jay, listened and helped me to find a way to cope with it. He kept me laughing. I remember him at my grandmother Lucia's house telling jokes, and we would all be in stitches. I also remember his boundless energy. He always got things done. We stayed close over our adult lives and shared many fun family times with our children and families. I cannot express the depths to which I will miss talking to him and knowing he was just up the road in Bethesda. Thank you. Madeline Durkin will be coming up.
Madeline Durkin and Julian's niece, and I'm going to read a poem called He Is Gone, which has an anonymous author. You can shed tears that he is gone, or you can smile because he has lived. You can close your eyes and pray that he'll come back. Or you can open your eyes and see all that he's left. Your heart can be empty because you can't see him. Or you can be full of the love you shared. You can turn your back on tomorrow and live yesterday. Or you can be happy for tomorrow because of yesterday. You can remember him and only that he's gone. Or you can cherish the memory and let it live on. You can cry and close your mind, be empty and turn your back. Or you can do what he would want. Smile, open your eyes, and go on. Michael Lewis will be doing the next reading.
Hi, I'm Michael Lewis. I am Julian's nephew by marriage. Just a little context for my reading. Something Julian didn't wear on his sleeve was the fact that he was a Vietnam veteran. And when I came back from serving in Iraq myself, he was one of the first people who called me. So it was really great to have somebody like that in my life who understood where I was coming from. He also was there. One of my favorite memories was he was there for my wife Jennifer's graduation from George Washington Medical School. And it was just fantastic to have him around for all the really important parts of our lives. And so with that, I found a poem by Robert Burns that I think kind of sums it up. An honest man lies here at rest. Is ever God with his image blessed? The friend of man, the friend of truth, the friend of age, guide of youth. A few hearts like his with virtue warmed, a few heads with knowledge so informed. If there's another world, he lives in bliss. If there's none, he made the best of this. And I think I'm going to be followed by Mr. Reed.
Hello, I'm David Reed, a longtime friend of Julian and Ann and David and Kate. I'll try not to just read it, but Julian and I were in the same UNC medical class of 1971. Actually, starting in 71. One second, I got something important. It's could have been trouble. There we go. Someone introduced us to each other at lunch one day early on. He was wearing some eye-popping green and black and maybe some red, long plaid pants. And I thought, this guy is either an odd duck or a man who is confident in his own convictions. It turned out he was a bit of both, though odd only in the good ways. We became BFFs, and although I only recently learned what that means, it was true. Best friends forever. We ended up living together until going different directions for our psychiatry residencies. We smoked some cigarettes, we drank some beer, we studied a lot, and we played a lot of ping pong. But mostly, we laughed a lot. Julian was a happy, fun-loving guy. I spoke to one of my classmates this week, and he said what he remembered most about Julian was his infectious laugh. Other classmates have emailed about his warmth and humor. But I learned that he had had a not-so-fun time before he came to medical school. He was 4 years older than me, and had gone to Vietnam before it was a tourist destination. On his return to the U.S., he took a job at a bank in Atlanta. His job was calling poor people to tell them that their house or their car was being repossessed. For a caring person like Julian used to keep cash in his car to give to the beggars on the side of the highways. This was too much. He developed symptoms that mimicked exactly those of a brain tumor. After a medical workup ruled this out, it was clear that his symptoms were directly related to his anxiety and unhappiness from his job. So he quit the job, and he went back to school for the medical school prerequisites and ended up in my class, ultimately becoming the kind and caring psychiatrist that we know. The thing that struck me early on was just how vital and lively and energetic Julian was. He was a wonderful force, a can-do personality, a positive, optimistic, active, and enthusiastic presence. Some years ago, he needed a new roof on his house. I'm sure he thought something like, no problem, I can do this. And he enlisted David as his assistant. And soon they had a new roof. And you couldn't Google how to do it back then. I'm pretty sure, though, it also took longer than Julian predicted. My wife and I always talked about Julian time as compared to normal time. He was always confident we could do something or be somewhere in much less time than was possible. We always got there, but not when he thought we would. Speaking of my wife, it is important to note that I would never have met her except for Julian. Thank you, Julian. He had twisted my arm to go with him to volunteer at a free medical clinic in Durham in our second year of medical school. It turned out that Lisa, my wife, and a nursing student friend of hers had also chosen that night to volunteer. Lisa and her friend were from Greensboro, as was Julian, and knew people in common, and we ended up having a great evening, mostly at a bar drinking beer after the clinic. Soon thereafter, Lisa and I started dating. Julian was a great friend through good times and tough times. But I can't think of an area of life that he wasn't great at, really. He was a devoted and happy husband who loved Anne so much. He said often how lucky he felt to have her. Anne concurs in this, by the way. They had a great partnership. He was proud of her for so many things. Julian was a good father and loved David and Kate so much. He was proud of them, and he was always there for them through their ups and downs. His was a consistent and unwavering love. And I know Julian was a terrific psychiatrist. He knew psychiatry, but he also knew a lot of general medicine, having done a fellowship in consultation liaison psychiatry in addition to medical school. He also grew up as the son of a doctor, as you know. He was an old-fashioned psychiatrist. He spent nearly an hour with most of his patients, not like the frequently seen psychiatrist of these days who says, hello, here's your prescription, and goodbye in 10 minutes. He was a psychotherapist who also knew how to give medicine, and he was devoted to his patients. He had no wish to retire, and in fact was talking to patients by phone or Skype, literally up to the time he had to go to the hospital at the end. And this despite being often in pain and confined to an easy chair and in a hospital bed. But Julian was kind and generous to everyone, his parents, his aunt, his brothers and sisters, and to me and my family. My son, who currently lives in D.C., told me he is reminded of Julian every day. When he sees the museums or the zoo or walks near the Potomac, all the places Julian happily took us to over the years on our visits. I cannot really believe that this unique and wonderful man will not be with us. He will be terribly missed. He will not be forgotten. And let's see, Anisha, Kalila.
Take it down here. This is kind of weird, sorry. Thank you. I am. There we go. Are you sure? No, it's fine. I'm Julian's niece. I called him Uncle Jay as well. Catherine Clearly's my mom, and my cousin Kate told me this was one of his favorite songs. So. Took my love and I took it down. Climbed a mountain and I turned around, and I saw my reflection in the snow-covered hills till a landslide brought me down. Oh, mirror in the sky, what is love? Can the child within my heart rise above? Can I sail through the changing ocean tides? Can I handle the seasons of my life? Oh. Well, I've been afraid of changing, 'cause I build my life around you. But time makes you bolder, even children get older, and I'm getting older too. And I'm getting older too. And take my love and take it down. I climb a mountain and I turn around. Will you see my reflection in the snow-covered hills where the landslide brought me down? Where the landslide brought me down.
Good afternoon, my name's Jeff Gould and I'm one of Julian's nephews. This is a poem called Afterglow by Helen Lowry Marshall. I'd like the memory of me to be a happy one. I'd like to leave an afterglow of smiles when life is done. I'd like to leave an echo whispering softly down the ways of happy times and laughing times and bright and sunny days. I'd like the tears of those who grieve to dry before the sun, of happy memories that I leave when life is done. And my cousin Michael DeVaney is going to follow me.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michael DeVaney, another one of Julian's nephews. Thank you all for being here today. I'm going to be reading an excerpt from Fahrenheit 451. And to me, this reading is about Julian's impact on all of our lives and the memories that we have with him. For me, it's a lot of time on the beach, on the golf course, or Sunday night dinners at the Brantley's house, and him dancing around like a lunatic in his living room listening to me. I think he'd want us to all keep those memories with us and have them carry on forever going forward. Everyone must leave something behind when he dies. A child, or a book, or a painting, or a house, or a pair of shoes made, or a garden planted. Something your hand touched some way, so your soul has somewhere to go when you die. And when people look at the flower you planted, you're there. It doesn't matter what you do, so long as you change something from the way it was before you touched it into something that's like you after you take your hands away. The difference between the man who cuts lawns and the real gardener is in the touching. The lawn cutter might just, well, not been there at all. The gardener will be there a lifetime. With that, I'll pass it to my brother, Matt Devaney.
Good afternoon, everyone. Another nephew of Julian's. Chose a reading by J.R. Tolkien that I think encapsulates Julian's love for nature, for his outdoorsmanship, for his love for construction when he was not seeing patients in the family. Roads go ever on, over rock and under tree, by caves where never sun has shone, by streams that never find the sea, over snow by winter sown, and through the merry flowers of June, over grass and over stone, and under mountains in the moon. Roads go ever on, under cloud and under star, yet feet that wandering have gone, turn at last home afar. Eyes that fire and sword have seen, and horror in the halls of stone, look at last on meadows green, and trees and hills they long have known. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am David Brantley. I'm Julian's son. Thank you all for coming here today to celebrate my father's life. I look out in the crowd and I just see so many old faces that my father loved, and it's really great to have everybody together. So, as many of you know or could perhaps imagine, I wasn't the easiest child to raise. I had a little more energy than the average kid on the playground. So this energy at times was misinterpreted by a select number of all my teachers as misbehavior. So I'll spare you the details. However, let's just say my parents received more than a fair share of concerned phone calls from the staff at Pyle Middle School. While some fathers may have given up on their son after being walked home by the principal for skateboarding and listening to Snoop Dogg while smoking cigarettes, my dad instead built me a skateboard ramp and videotaped me skateboarding. So despite not being on the trajectory of becoming a doctor like he and his father, he gave me unconditional support for whatever I was interested in throughout my life. While there were no shortage of bumps in the road, I graduated from Whitman right down the street, and then from Miami University in Ohio. And I would have never made it through either without my dad having my back constantly. He truly never gave up on me in any situation. And I can't think of a better quality of a dad than that. I'm so grateful our relationship was able to evolve into a strong and loving bond. I cherish the memories of us watching Tar Heel games, golfing, playing tennis, driving across the country together, cracking jokes, and really just doing about anything with him. Just being in his company was enough for me. I'll never forget eavesdropping on him, gloating about the 7 rental properties next to the University of Maryland that I helped my parents purchase. All I ever wanted to do was bring my dad a fraction of the pride that he gave me as a father. I took great pride in showing off how funny and cool he was to my friends, but more important than funny and cool, he was kind, humble, compassionate, and a caring man with a heart of gold. The true measure of success, in my opinion, is not how much you get, but how much you give to others, which has been spoken by other people who have been talking about him. And my father embodied this, like David Reed said earlier, having sessions with his patients in his final weeks of his life. While I would stress collecting rent checks from tenants, my dad cut breaks to some of the years who were having a hard time. And he just wanted to make sure that everybody else was okay. And for that and many other reasons, I love you, Dad. Thank you. Here's my Uncle Johnny for the youth.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am John Devaney. I'm Julian Ian's brother and Julian's brother-in-law. And I just want to begin with 2 preliminaries. One, my wife Debbie said that everyone's going to keep it brief, and there's sort of an admonition. And I'm not going to comply. I've got, and second, I'm sometimes a crier in events like this, and my niece Kate has agreed that should that happen, she's going to hold up a box of Tic Tacs. And if you knew Julian, Tic Tacs were his life and blood, and beer. So Kate's going to carry me through should that occur. I was the youngest of 5 kids and the only boy, and Julian was a brother-in-law, but he was a brother to me. And as the youngest of 5 of 4 older sisters, there were many times I really needed a brother, and he was there for me. I had so many great life experiences with him in so many different situations and places, and I guess that gives me, in addition to so many of you here, kind of a unique perspective into who he was in so many wonderful ways. About 3 weeks ago, I was lucky to spend about 7 hours one-on-one with Julian at the hospice place up in Rockville, including several hours outside. It was his last time ever outside, 3 hours in the sunlight. And it was great. We were under a tree. He was looking up at birds, correcting me about what types of birds they were. But for me, it was such a treasure to have those hours. And what I'll take away more than anything from the conversations we had that day was his talk about the perspective on the life he had. He told me he expected to live into his 80s and that he thought he had many more good years ahead of him. But he was so grateful, he said, for the life he had. He talked about the richness of that life, how it was grounded in the family that he loves so much. He talked, too, about the fulfilling career he had as a psychiatrist and his love, and he used that word, his love for his patients. He also talked about the many friends who kept life so entertaining, including, perhaps most important, his cats. And he talked also about the robust health that he enjoyed for 7 decades. And the beauty of that moment in that courtyard, literally about 3 weeks ago tomorrow, was hearing how fulfilled he felt. He had the satisfaction of a life well lived, and he felt privileged for that. So as we all mourn today, we can find strength in the simple fact that Julian felt he had been privileged and that he had a great journey with so many of you who are here in the room today who we loved so much. So in the time that I have left, and Debbie, I still have some more time, I want to highlight some parts of Julian's journey, and I want to do a little bit of a chronology, and I've said this before, but I think there's a real intersection between chronology and the character of a person. The chronology of Julian's life has kind of a Forrest Gump quality to it. He seemed to just pop up at these significant national events, political or pop culture type events. He was born in New Hampshire, the year that Japan and Germany surrendered to the Allies and World War II ended. His parents had married a few years earlier. And an interesting side note, the best man at their wedding was a gentleman by the name of Dr. Isaac Taylor, whose son, James Taylor, went on to be a pretty decent career as a singer-songwriter. Legend has it, and there is an awkward relationship between legend and life, but legend has it that James and Julian played together occasionally as kids, as their fathers practiced medicine near each other in North Carolina, where Julian and his family moved when he was a young kid. Having belted out many a tune with Julian over the years, I can assure you he never quite developed the voice that James had. But Julian was a better dancer than James Taylor, I'm here to say that. Now, as a kid growing up in Greensboro, Julian had the same exuberance and curiosity for life that we saw right up into those last days, right up to that day I saw him pointing out birds in a tree above us. He was smart, curious, he was a talented student, and his earliest passions were science and nature. So picture him as a 10-year-old kid walking briskly through the woods of Greensboro in search of snakes, birds, skunks, and any other critters he and his friends could find. He kept a regular supply of pet snakes in his room in cages. Escapes were not uncommon. And speaking of that, not too long ago I was playing golf with Julian in South Carolina, and a 4-foot snake slithered across the tee box. As a New York City kid, basically, I ran away. Julian thought this was a great turn of events. He went after it, grabbed it by the tail. The thing turned around to try to bite him. He dropped it, laughed, and tried to pick it up again. That's kind of who he was. But I just have to tell another critter story, and then I'll move on from that, because it reflects his deep well of empathy that he had, and his eccentricity. He learned when he was a kid that a mother skunk had a brood of skunks out in a field near their house and had abandoned one of the skunks. So Julian thought the right thing to do was to go out and rescue the skunk, which he did. He put it in a cage in his bedroom, just a few feet from the snakes, And after a few weeks, the smell got a bit overwhelming, and Julian had to release his skunk friend back into the field. But, just think about that. That's the heart and the compassion, and also the love for nature that he had. And when we were together 3 weeks ago, as he was looking up in that tree, he said to me, you know what, I'm just a nature guy. That's who I am. So now back to the chronology. When Julian was 15, the landmark Greensboro sit-in took place at the Woolworths department store, just a few miles from the Brantleys' homes. One of the great moments in our civil rights history. And around that same time, black musicians were becoming important forces in the civil rights movement, bringing black and white audiences together in ways that they'd never been before. And with his passion for music, Julian discovered a brand new world as a big part of him. He was only about 16 years old in approximately 1961, and he and friends heard about a guy named James Brown. And they went to a mostly black club outside Greensboro and saw one of the early James Brown concerts. About a year later, Julian and a friend got the somewhat crazy idea of taking the friend's family car, driving from Washington, D.C., right from Greensboro to Washington, D.C., to see the great jazz piano player Bobby Timmons. They made it to D.C., they saw him, and by the way, I think Harry has played some Bobby Timmons for us, or maybe playing some Bobby Timmons for us. The concert ended, they realized they didn't have enough money to get back to Greensboro. And so to show how simple the times were back then, they thought, okay, who do we know? And this kid said to Julian, a family friend of mine is a senator, let's call him up. So they called up the senator and said, hey, we need gas and food money to get back to Greensboro. And Senator Sam Ervin said, come on over to my house, and gave him money, and that's how they got back to Greensboro. The stories of concerts and just seeing people early could go on and on. There was the Allman Brothers in the movie theater before anybody knew who they were. There was Bobby Blue Bland, who we're going to be playing some of tonight. The chronology of Julian then picks up with his undergraduate days at UNC Chapel Hill. He was a talented student, but he was also passionate about the parties and extracurricular activities that Chapel Hill had to offer. I think he would say he reached his potential as a student later in life, as a medical student, and in undergrad school had, shall we say, some other priorities. And as others have described, when he graduated, we were at the height of the Vietnam War, and Julian volunteered. He enlisted to go to Vietnam and did his time there, as did his brother John, who I know is here today as well. Now, when Julian returned from Vietnam, he went to med school, and there was an interlude there. We heard from David about those great descriptions of your time together at med school, and how you came to appreciate Julian for all that he was. And for all of you here today who knew Julian well, I'm sure you'll agree it made perfect sense that he chose psychiatry as his area of practice. It fit who he was, a person with a deep well of empathy and compassion, and also someone who was a very engaged listener. When you spoke with Julian, you knew that you were being heard, that he was listening and absorbing. Now, he also wasn't shy about saying you were dead wrong, but even then, you knew he was listening. And back to the chronology, and maybe the most important part, after medical school, Julian moved to Boston for his residency, where he met Anne at the Bedford, Mass. VA Hospital, a fine institution. Little sarcasm there, sorry. Anne was completing her graduate school field placement on her way toward a psychiatric social work master's degree. And we've heard conflicting stories from Anne and Julian about how their dating relationship cemented into something more serious. They both agree it involved a kiss in a parking lot, in a car. Julian claimed Anne initiated the kiss. Anne had a different recollection. As someone who grew up with my feminist sister, I believe Julian's version. In any event, after completing their time in Boston, Anne and Julian moved to Virginia in 1979 and began the wonderful, successful careers they had. Limited time doesn't allow for an adequate description of Julian's career as a psychiatrist and the hundreds and hundreds of patients whose lives he improved by caring deeply about them, understanding them, and giving them a genuine sense of self-worth and confidence. As Julian's longtime assistant, Sue Rabin. Sue, would you raise your hand? Sue, thank you for all you've done for Julian. Sue said,
very recently. Julian was a throwback. He really was like a country doctor whose sole focus was on his patients. His commitment to them was deep, and the business of the practice, sending out bills and the like, was secondary, and to him, frankly, just an annoyance. As people have described, we saw Julian's love for his patients right up to the very end, with him conducting sessions as recently as about 2.5 weeks ago. And I know that Ann, David, and Kate have gotten great comfort from the many patients who have reached out over the past weeks to say literally that Julian changed their lives by giving them happiness and a renewed sense of meaning and purpose. There's no better testament to a career than that. I'm almost done with the chronology. It continued, of course, with the arrivals of David and Kate in the 1980s, and the years that followed were special, and of course, not without some challenges here and there. Julian loved David and Kate with all that he had. He had so much pride in them as they developed into young adults. I'll vividly remember, David, your dad watching you glide across the soccer field, whipping a backhand against an opponent up here at Whitman High School. Kate, the pride he had when you were the lead role in one play after another, and he had that big video camera that was everybody's way. And the pride that he had in both of you, continued to his last day on this planet, as we saw in those poignant days in the hospice center that we all know in their own way were really special and valuable. Shake it, come on. Now, there's no way that a simple chronology can capture Julian's remarkable character, including his eccentricity and humor. So as I prepared these remarks, I asked Kate, Ann, David, Debbie, Lynn, and others, give me some images and memories of Julian. So I just want to give you a quick montage of what we all put together. There was a time when Julian was driving back to college, driving David back to college at Miami of Ohio. And before falling asleep in their shared hotel room on the road, David took out his contact lenses, put them in a cup of water on the nightstand. In the middle of the night, Julian woke up thirsty, noticed there was a glass of water conveniently located next to him. He reached over, chugged the whole thing, and David never saw those contacts again. Still on the topic of chugging, the very first time my parents and I met Julian was at a bar called the Idler in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Must have been 1977 or something like that. And I was a 20-year-old college student, and I was quite proud of my beer-chugging prowess. And when I made reference to that over lunch, on a Monday probably, Julian immediately challenged me. I just met this psychiatrist, this doctor who I was a little intimidated by. He just challenged me. As I recall, he knocked down a draft beer in about 4 seconds. And our Irish father was so excited to have a doctor come into the family, but a doctor who could chug a beer in 4 seconds is like he hit the daily double. Now, no discussion of Julian would be complete without mentioning his love for fixing things, assembling things, and buying endless supplies of bizarre, mostly unnecessary gadgets. He was very talented with his hands, and we remember our father saying to him so many times, "You could have been a surgeon." But for all of us, the most memorable part of Julian's fix-it efforts was the fact that he always held a flashlight by putting it in his mouth so that his hands would be free. And we all have memories of Julian emerging from the basement in a pair of shorts, a dirty t-shirt with a beam of light shooting from his mouth. And in his younger days, when everyone else would go to bed at midnight after a Saturday night party, Julian would put on oversized headphones, crank up the music, and dance in the living room by himself, often until 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, usually in front of a bay window and full of any neighbors who were out walking their dog. And speaking of dancing, Michael alluded to Julian's crazy dancing, but one of his preferences with dancing was to pick up one of their cats and dangle it from shoulder to shoulder. And we all have images of Julian dancing with a cat around his shoulder and neck, which is one of the reasons, by the way, for us, his nickname was the Cat. Just a couple of more vignettes, and then I will wrap up. But I think it was Catherine who mentioned Julian's boundless energy. And boy, do we see that. His idea of a perfect Saturday was to plant a couple of trees in their backyard, to take down a couple of trees in their backyard, play a couple of sets of tennis, try to fit it around a golf, And we have many memories of Julian at the end of those weekend days, sitting in a chair with bags of ice tied to his knees, a bottle of Advil nearby, and a beer in hand while making pretty much the same plans for the next day. And then just two more vignettes. Several family members have asked me to comment on Julian's attire. And David alluded to it, and what David saw in whatever year that was, 1971, continued. Drabness in his wardrobe was a point of honor and pride. He mostly wore only browns and tans. He had the same style of J.C.B. work shoes for 40 years. And he thought, most important, he thought it sacrilege to ever wear a piece of clothing with a logo on it. I remember making the mistake once of wearing a Ralph Lauren logo golf shirt when I was with Julian. He looked over at me, looked at the logo, and his most mocking voice said, "John, how's your horse polo game coming these days?" Now, Ann did one time persuade Julian to step things up by buying some UGG slippers. Unfortunately, he struggled a bit and submitted the online Amazon order, and those women's slippers are probably still in his closet. Now, most of you know that humor was just a big part of Julian. He loved a good joke. He had a deep, enthusiastic laugh that David described and that your former classmate said in a letter. Boy, I couldn't agree more. His enthusiasm, though, was particularly strong in response to his own jokes. And he actually kept written versions of jokes in his wallet. And we'll always remember that infectious, hearty laugh from Julian after he told one of his jokes. And if you could get a small chuckle from him in response to one of your jokes, that was really a big accomplishment. The last memory or image of Julian that others have related to me that I want to pass on is how much he knew about the world. You know, the term Renaissance man is overused, no question about it, but it really is the right term for Julian. His knowledge of the world seemed endless, whether it was a question about a country, a historical figure, a bird, a religion, a philosophy of life. He seemed to always have the answer, and it was right, it was correct. If you're out for a walk with Julian and asked him to identify a bird, he wouldn't just say, "Hey, that's a heron." He'd tell you the type of heron, its diet, its migration pattern, its predators. And there were times, to be sure, when, after 10 minutes you were sorry you asked the question. But his depth of knowledge reflected just exceptional curiosity, remarkable sharpness of mind. And, in this age of technology, when people just look things up, people like Julian are rare and becoming rarer and rarer. And that's one of the things I'm really going to miss about him, in addition to everything else that we've all talked about. As I wrap up, my hope is that this chronology of Julian's life and the memories that I've shared on behalf of others with you give you a good sense of the character of this remarkable man. It's really hard to summarize somebody's character in a few words, and I can't do that with Julian, but there are two straight traits that for me stand out among everything else. And one of them is what just about everyone else who's spoken has said, and that was kindness. He was as kind a person as I've ever met, always putting himself in the shoes of others, always putting himself after others. And he had a special empathy for people who didn't have the same opportunities and fortune that so many of us in this room have had. He was a champion of the underdog in life. That kindness was at the core of who he was. I saw this just a few weeks ago in the hospice center when a nurse wasn't giving Julian the care that I thought he needed and deserved at the time. And I said, "Julian, you ought to complain." And he said to me, "No." He said, "I feel sorry for her. She has to work every day around people who are shaking. He has to work every day around people who are dying, and she doesn't get paid much for doing it." Even at the time he was dying in a lot of pain, he was putting himself in the shoes of somebody else. That's who he was. The other trait that stands out is that Julian was just a hell of a lot of fun. He was determined to enjoy his time on this planet, and by God, he did. Julian, on behalf of so many of us here today, thank you for the good times, for your great company, your infectious enthusiasm for life. You had a rich life, and you made ours even richer. And I'll conclude with some comments to Ann and David and Kate. And these past 2.5 years have been incredibly hard, more hardship and pain than anyone should have to endure. At the same time, though, these years gave you and Julian the chance to display what really was an extraordinarily powerful reciprocal love. The love and care you gave Julian over these years was inspiring. It's what gave him the strength to soldier on and to fight as hard as he did with the absolutely remarkable courage he displayed over these many hard months. And because of you, he left this world knowing he was deeply loved. And that love is reciprocal. David and Kate, as I said before, your dad was so proud of both of you, and the deep love he had for you is on full display over these last years. And this can be the hardest part for me. We've known you're always a remarkable person, someone who's full of empathy, kindness, love, strength. You know how much Julian loved you, and for those of us who knew both of you so well, it was so heartwarming to see and experience the wonderful marriage you and Julian had for 40 years. David alluded to that before. Just the partnership was just something that was incredibly uplifting. As a couple, you made our lives richer by the love you had for each other. That love, Anne, was on display more than ever over these last 2.5 years. Your strength, your care for Julian, your care for your family were simply awe-inspiring. Very proud to have you as my sister, and as I think about this new life that's been thrust upon you, please know that you've got a huge team of family and friends, including everyone here today, to support you along the way. And finally, Julian, we miss you greatly, but the effect you've had on us and the memories we have of you will be with us forever. Thank you.
concludes the service for today. Thank you again for coming, and we would love for all of us to join us, all of you to join us next door for a reception. But before we all leave for the reception, I think Anne would like to say a few words. Debbie, your glasses.
Shake the Tic Tacs. I'd like to express my very deepest thanks to everyone who's come from far and near to celebrate Julian's life, remember him, and as everyone has said, his life that was fully well lived. When Julian and I discussed service plans, he said, please do something really simple and small. I don't like attention focused on me. Well, as we can see, he didn't get that one his way. David, Kate, and I are profoundly touched and grateful for the bounty of love and support that everyone here has, expressed and given us over the past 2.5 years. And this really challenging chapter in our lives, and we couldn't have done it without all of you and holding us and, loving us, and, we're in it together, and it was just made it bearable. So thank you.